Well, good afternoon, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Bree Mackey. I'm the director here at the Office of Broadband Development. We do have other team members that will be helping with this presentation on as well as other team members for our team. So just want to give a quick shout out to all of them. They've been working incredibly hard. And if you've been involved at all in the BEAD conversations, you know it's very complicated. So we thought it would just be really helpful to do a quick check-in with everybody. What's coming up next, sort of what's been happening at the office, and sort of, like I said, the next steps in what's going to be happening with BEAD. Next slide, Anna. So the general flow of the conversations that we're hoping to have today, again, just giving a quick update the Office of Broadband and the state of broadband in Minnesota. And then you can see the rest of them. We'll talk about BEAD priorities, the process of the BEAD eligible locations by NTIA, pre-qualification, sub-grantee selection, a little bit about the differences between BEAD and the Minnesota programs. I know there has been a lot of confusion with that. And we had a legislative directive to try to mirror those as closely as we could. But again, our final volume 2 is posted on our website from when we started and when it was approved by NTIA. So you can sort of see how those have changed. And then what happens after our final proposal is submitted to NTIA, and then some additional resources that we have. Next slide. So with that, as a reminder, our office was created in state legislature in 2013. We currently have 14 staff located across Minnesota, many of which you know very well if you've been involved in our grant programs. And we are currently doing additional hiring to meet the needs of the BEAD program. We have currently the border-to-border grant program, the low density program, and the line extension. So those are the programs that we have historically worked with. As many of you know, we have allocated all the funding we have that has been appropriated to us through the state legislature. And so what's next with those programs is just getting them implemented and getting all the construction that we currently have going. And then we're looking at BEAD to fill some of those gaps. And then also we are in charge of the Digital Equity Act funding. There was a webinar this morning, and I'll talk a little bit about that at the end of this presentation. Next slide. So what are our unmet needs? So we know that we currently, these are numbers from December of 2024, that there are currently 143,000 households that don't have access to 25.3. And that was the Minnesota goal of 2022. And then you can see the 189,000 without access to the 100 by 20, which is our 2026 goal. Diane will go into a little bit more details on eligibility, but we're estimating that of those amounts, that about 81,000 of them would be eligible for BEAD funding. So just a reminder that the speed goals of BEAD are different than what we have here in Minnesota of a higher standard. And so I know there's always a lot of confusion with that, but we need to focus with the BEAD dollars with what is eligible. And then I just listed some historic data from the previous years. So next slide, please. One of the things that we did over the past year to have another tool and some data, research data, is we did a cost data analysis. So we went out for an RFP and really it was twofold. One, to understand the amount of funding that would be needed for the state under BEAD, but also understand what the dollar amount and cost would be to make sure that everyone would have wireline connection. So again, under state law and historically, our office has done primarily fiber. And so knowing that that has been a goal, what would it cost to determine all of the locations would be served? And then just a little bit information of CTC and what they use. So the CostQuest data and TIA data. This presentation that CTC did with the governor's task force is available on our website. So if you want more information, you can reach out to one of our team members or go to the website. And then finally, what did we find out from this? So next slide there, Anna. Um, the goals of the broadband infrastructure cost analysis was universal coverage, using the funding that we have available to the maximum, and then technical feasibility on which technologies would be necessary to be cost effective across the state. Next slide. So what did we find out? And I don't think this maybe would surprise any of you, but currently they used a little different number. So I know the previous slide had a little bit different number, but they estimated that we had 193 passings across the state that would be needed to get fiber. And the estimate for that funding would be over $2 billion. Now, when we look at using BEAD dollars with Fiberline, we're estimating there would have been 99,000 that would be under BEAD, and it would be $1.1 billion in needed cost. If we served with BEAD 100%, they would get fiber. That would be the estimate. And then we know in Minnesota, we have 652 million. However, our estimate for actual infrastructure dollars, taking away all of the additional requirements with the program and costs, we're estimating around 628 million available in grants. And with that, we are projecting we may get to 90,000 locations by fiber, which you can see that leaves about 9,000 locations that we would have to look at alternative technology in order to stay within the 628 million. Again, these are estimates, but do give us some data to sort of understand the funding mechanisms and the restraints that we have here in the state. All right, next slide. So as a reminder, and many of you probably are aware, again, the Border Grant Program and Low Density were really competitive grant programs to help make the business case and have a public-private partnership to get internet across Minnesota. You can see what ISPs had about 2.5 years, what the speed goals need to be, and it was a reimbursement for actual costs throughout the builds of the project. All of that, as I stated, has been allocated and is in contracting or is already in construction. So we do not have any additional border or low population density dollars unless there would be some slippage or some money that was not used where we could put into probably the line extension program. The line extension program, again, all of these dollars are now allocated. We had 15 million, and that was through capital projects dollars. ISPs only had 1 year to complete the builds. Again, you can see the speed goals. And again, this is a reimbursement program with a max of 25,000 per grant location. Next slide, please. And here is just some historic data. I think it's really important to recognize the hard work that we have done across the state with our internet service providers and partners. But over the years, with border to border and low population, over $400 million of grants have been awarded. And look at the local match. So everybody has stepped up, and there's at least 50% across all of our programs with local match dollars. And we have been able to serve around 119,000 homes and businesses. As of December, we are hoping we can get all of the round 5 and 6 grant rounds closed up, and we are focusing then on 7 through 10 grant rounds. So you can see right there that the grant administrators are very busy with over 121 active projects and construction going on in the state already, and that doesn't obviously include BEAD. All right, next slide. And then with the line extension, just a quick update on numbers there, if that's something of interest to all of you. But that has been a really, has shown a really good program that really provides some gap needed. And, as we look at this with the BEAD program and as our staff, we talk about this, that this is a program that probably will really help with the BEAD gaps that we may see as well, making sure that the line extension program can continue in the future to fill those gaps. So that was a quick run through. The slides will be available to all of you as well after the webinar, and we will take questions at the end. But now I'm going to turn it over to Diane, and she will give an update and really get through the meats of the BEAD program and what we can expect next.
Thanks, Bree. This slide just shows the full dollars allocated to Minnesota for the BEAD program, and then what's been allocated for the digital equity or digital opportunity program. So our allocation for BEAD, which is the infrastructure program, is almost $652 million. And we have about 81,000 locations that are eligible for BEAD or were submitted on the preliminary list. We're waiting for NTIA approval. And the current federal guidance is once a contract is fully executed, and we are a little bit out from being able to engage in contracting, but there is 4 years to construct. Next slide. This slide, what we're working with some preliminary data. It's a little bit more updated than what we were showing last summer, but the blue areas are those locations, again, visible at a state level, so you can't for sure say your location is in or out. But the blue areas are those that will be eligible for BEAD funding based on the data that we submitted to NTIA for their approval. With the BEAD funding, and we covered this a little bit in the digital opportunity webinar this morning. BEAD funding is for infrastructure, and there are 3 priorities. Priority number 1 is to get service to all unserved locations, and those are defined by NTIA as locations that do not have a reliable broadband service of at least 25 megabits download and 3 megabits upload. Priority number 2 is to get a reliable broadband service to all underserved locations, and those are the locations that are reported to have 25 meg down and 3 up, but not at or above 100 megabits per second down and 20 megabits per second upload. And one big distinction between how we have operated our border-to-border and low-density and line extension programs in the past is the state's programs have relied on a wired broadband service delivering those speeds. The speed breakdowns are the same, but the technology is a bit different. For the federal BEAD program, the NTIA considers service to be a reliable broadband service if it's delivered over a wired offering or over a licensed or licensed by rule fixed wireless service. So that's a big distinction. So you won't be eligible for BEAD funding if your location has service from a licensed a non-cellular licensed fixed wireless provider. And we anticipate using all of our funding, the $651 million, for priorities 1 and 2. The third priority of BEAD funding is to get gigabit symmetrical speeds to community anchor institutions. We don't believe that we will have funding for that. And then any funding left over, which again, we don't believe we'll have in Minnesota, is for non-deployment uses. So there will be some variations by states, and kind of the Mississippi River is a breakdown. If you're west of the Mississippi River, you probably didn't get enough BEAD allocation from NTIA to go beyond the 3 infrastructure priorities. If you're east of the Mississippi River, you may have adequate funding to get a reliable broadband service to all of your unserved, underserved, and community anchor institutions, and have funding left over to use for non-deployment uses, which are more of those digital opportunity type uses. Next slide, Anna. I know everyone's been kind of asking when we're going to be able to roll out the BEAD funding. These are all tentative dates, but to aid in the discussion, we have put some dates into the framework that was outlined in our approved Volume 2. And the gray shaded boxes are kind of those that have occurred, and then the dark blue are the future actions under the BEAD program. So on May 29th, our BEAD Volume 1 was approved, and so we could commence our BEAD challenge process. And that challenge process was held over the summer and into the fall to establish that final list of locations that are going to be eligible for BEAD funding. At the same time, we were busy with curing our Volume 2 to get it into a form where NTIA would actually approve it. And that occurred on October 3rd of 2024. That's an important date because 1 year from the date of your approved Volume 2 is when you have to submit your final proposal. And so Minnesota's final proposal will be due October 3rd of 2025. We did, like I said, conduct the BEAD challenge process, and we submitted what the data indicates would be the final list of BEAD eligible locations from that challenge process to NTIA on December 18th, and we are on our second round of curing that list with them now. Going forward in the January-February 2025 timeframe, we are doing the pre-qualification process for interested applicants, and we did post information on the material that will be required for that pre-qual process on the website last week. And in the meantime, we're waiting on NTIA to approve that final list of locations that will be eligible for BEAD funding. We know that's important to the providers so that they know the locations that they can apply for. And then these dates, again, specific dates, very tentative, based a lot on when we get that final list of BEAD eligible locations approved by NTIA. And then some of the mechanics between rounds may cause dates to shift. But we are anticipating that the first sub-round selection would open March 10th and close April 7th. This first sub-round, and we're calling it the first round of BEAD. We're also calling it 11A because we had 1 through 10 rounds of our border-to-border program. And so to minimize confusion, we are calling it also 11. But it will be for fiber projects only or priority projects. And then applicants will be able to create their own project areas in their application submission. Once we go through that list and determine who we would likely award, we will open up with the remaining eligible locations crafted into project areas by our office. That was a requirement by NTIA. We could not, in round 2 and 3, let the applicants pick their project areas. NTIA required that our office create those project areas. So we will be doing that prior to April 23rd and then open that up as the second subgrantee selection window. And here we'll be looking at applications from all technologies, and again, by those project areas defined by our office. And that window would close May 21st. Then we will go through those, determine which ones to award. There could be overlapping, so we'll have to run them through the scoring rubric. And then we would open up the third subgrantee selection round under the BEAD program, or round 11C, and that would be June 19th to July 10th. At that point, we'd have the extremely high cost per location threshold nailed down. Again, it would be all technologies, and it would be applications by project areas defined by our office. And then from that window, July 10th to September 3rd, we would be finalizing that list of all of the selected subgrantees, taking it to the commissioner for approval. NTI requires meetings with them and then a 2-week public comment period. And then we would submit the Minnesota BEAD final proposal to NTIA for its approval by that 365-day deadline, which is October 3rd of 2025. So that's where we are at right now. There's a lot of work between these rounds. Some of it, will depend on what we get and what we see. But that's the rounds with the dates as best we can put that forward today. Next slide, Anna. Just to go over some of this, so we did send our list from the BEAD challenge process of the BEAD final locations on December 18th. We we did do deduplication. There is some subsequent deduplication with the recent USDA Reconnect rounds that were announced after our submission. And I think we have some line extension round threes to deduplicate. And that will be an ongoing process to cure that list with NTIA until their approval. And then we'll have that final list. Should there be any other awards with public funding, those would back out of the list going forward. But we would use that final approved list to open up the grant round. We aren't sure of NTIA's timeline for approval, but we are using mid-February to set our other dates. And then only those locations on that NTIA approved list of BEAD eligible locations will qualify for BEAD funding. And then when we submit the final proposal, we do have to show that all of the locations on the list will receive some type of broadband service with speeds of at least 100 down, 20 up. There is also the ability, if it were to be determined that that's not really a broadband serviceable location, the point's in the middle of a highway, or it's not really a broadband serviceable location, it's an old farmstead, the house collapsed, or it's a hay bale in the middle of a field, we can make those notes and then we wouldn't have to show that they're getting service. But otherwise, we'll have to demonstrate that there are service to all eligible locations, and that can be fiber, it can be coax, it could be DSL, fixed wireless, unlicensed fixed wireless, and even the low Earth orbiting satellite. And as Bree mentioned with our cost study, it does look like to get something to everyone, there will be a few thousand locations that probably will end up with a satellite type service as their BEAD solution because of the requirement that NTIA has that we show we got something to everyone. Next slide, Anna. All right, like I mentioned, we posted pre-qualification information on the website last week. It is a draft. We will continue to work on that as we get questions to make things clear, as NTIA might come out with additional guidance. We are conducting the pre-qualification process in advance of the BEAD project application window opening for two reasons. It will save expense and effort by potential applicants. You can look over the required documentation. The vast majority of that documentation is what is required by NTIA. So you'll know what you're going to need to submit and can decide whether to apply. And then once you get into that application process, it will give us the information to make that determination whether you are eligible to submit an actual project application. And for us, it will also save time under very tight timelines allowed by NTIA, since we only have the 365 days, which already started last October. If we can do the pre-qual process in advance of get a lot of that information in and reviewed and approved, then we have much less information that we need to consider when we get into the actual project applications, where the focus will be on project areas, budget, timelines. So that's the reason to do the pre-qual process in advance of the actual application, which is, again, different from how we have run prior grant rounds with the state. Next slide, Anna. All right, so I've explained kind of the three rounds that we plan to use. They are outlined in our volume 2 that was approved. And again, we're calling them rounds 11A, 11B, and 11C to sync up with our prior 10 historical rounds for border to border, so there isn't confusion. And they'll be 11A, 11B, 11C, or 1, 2, and 3 for BEAD. And the first window, March 10th to April 7th. Here, the focus again is on priority or fiber projects, and applicants will be able to select their project areas. So if you're kind of hesitant about whether or not to participate in that first round, if you are a fiber provider and you want to define who's you're going to serve in your project, please participate in the first round. The second round is for any applicant of any technology type applicant. And we will be defining the project areas that you will have to submit for, and that window is planned for April 23rd to May 21st, and then the third window, similar to the second, June 19th to July 10th, again, tentative dates. And then we'll be busy July 10th to the 3rd of October, finalizing everything, because it's really all one big package. You cannot say definitively applicants in round 11A will be approved because at that point, for example, we won't have the extremely high cost per location threshold set. So while we may want to fund somebody, if it ends up their cost per location exceeds what is set as the final extremely high cost per location, we won't be able to under the NTIA requirements. So next slide, Anna. All right, at this map, it's a little bit confusing because the color schemes are the same, but the map on the left-hand side is if you go to our new interactive map, which has the new data, and you pull up the layer showing areas of the state that would be eligible for the border-to-border or low-density program if we had funding to offer those, and remember, those are based on wireline service, then you would see the map on the left. And the color scheme on the left, pink are unserved areas and are eligible. Purple is underserved and are eligible. Green are served and are ineligible. And then the blue areas on the left are those projects that have been approved for funding but are not yet constructed. So those locations under those blue areas are going to get a broadband service, a wired broadband service, and would not be eligible for our historic border-to-border low density programs. If you look at the map on the right, the pink means the same, it's unserved. The purple is underserved. The green is served. But here, the blue means those are BEAD eligible locations. We did this for a visualization. It is the preliminary data. Once we have the final list of broadband eligible locations approved by NTA, we'll do more work with that data, but because it's preliminary, one of the things we didn't do was put that approved list, the blue list on the left, onto the map on the right. So this is going to get a little confusing, but see what you can see is in the southwest corner of Minnesota, there's a lot of pink area. Some of that will be built out with projects that have been funded, as shown in the blue on the left map, but they're still pink on the BEAD eligible map, and they will not be eligible for funding with BEAD funding because in that southwest corner, a lot of that's probably served with a licensed fixed wireless service, and so it's not eligible for BEAD funding. But on the southeast corner now, you'll see there is a lot of pink area on the left map that is covered with BEAD blue on the right-hand map because those areas are eligible. Fixed wireless doesn't work as well in the bluff country, and so it's not as prevalent. And I think also probably the biggest fixed wireless provider there is not using licensed spectrum, and so then it's still eligible for BEAD funding. And again, we'll have better data coming out once we get that final list. We just didn't want to spend a lot of time, especially because we're really busy right now, working with preliminary data. But we'll have more information available, like number of locations by county, that we'll post to the website when we get that final list of BEAD eligible locations. And that's more for the lay people that are on this webinar. I know the providers have their own GIS folks and they have their MapQuest or their CostQuest licenses so that they can pull up eligible locations themselves already. But we wanted to try to show where the BEAD funding is going to be available for application by entities that qualify to apply. So next slide. All right, so what happens after the final proposal is submitted, which currently is scheduled for October 3rd? We don't know how long it will take for NTIA to approve. There are a handful of states that are at this point I don't know that anyone is signed off yet. I guess over the holidays I might have lost track. But once NTIA does approve the final proposal, then we can enter contracts with the selected subgrantees. And unlike our prior programs for BEAD, subgrantees must have all of their permits approved before any construction can begin. So that's a difference. Um, so you can't put any shovels in the ground until you have all of your permits, your SHPO permits, your environmental permits, MnDOT, DNR. Another difference to help with the expense of permitting and having those construction designs done to get the permits, we will reimburse for eligible expenditures back to the date of the RFP. Normally, the state grant programs only allow you to reimburse back to the date of the fully executed contract. Obviously, you can't get reimbursed until you have a fully executed contract, but we will accept invoices back to the date of the RFP. And at this point, we're looking at the RFP being published in late January or early February. And then once we have a fully executed contract, subgrantees, providers will have 4 years from the date of that contract to complete construction. So again, while we might get NTIA approval of our final proposal, maybe December of 2025, January 2026, a provider or a subgrantee may not want to sign that contract right away because that starts their 4-year clock. They may want to delay signing the contract until they've got a better handle on when they're going to have their permits in hand, because they can't start construction until they have their permits in hand. So there likely won't be a rush to get those fully executed contracts because that starts the clock ticking. There is the possibility of a 1-year extension. It's still a little fuzzy as to actually whether our office can award those extensions or whether it has to go through NTIA. But in any event, there is a time limit on getting the projects completed. So we're talking 2030 before some of this stuff is probably finished. Next slide, Anna. All right, so to help navigate through the BEAD process, we are going to establish weekly office hours. And at one of the next 2 office hours, we will be having a walkthrough of the grants management system. Jen and the team have been working really hard with a new grants management system to get it stood up to handle the BEAD process. And so we'll have a walkthrough of that because it will be different from the portal that we used the last couple of rounds. And it should also help with the reporting that's required of BEAD for the successful subgrantees. And then we have posted information on the website. If you have questions, please let us know because we are working to build an FAQ document, and that's very important so that everybody's got the same answer to the same question if you have it. And then we'll know if there are a lot of people asking the same type of question. We can cover it in the office hours, and then we'll make ourselves available like we did for the BEAD challenge process to go over new information, where we are in the process, and then to take questions. So those will start up next week. And I think next slide goes back to Bree.
Thank you, Diane. Actually, Hannah Buckland, our digital equity lead, is on, so I'm going to turn it over to her to give just a brief update. A lot of our work intersects with digital opportunity and digital equity, and want to make sure you are aware of what's happening there. Hannah?
Thank you, Bree. So I am the digital equity grant or digital equity program lead with the Office of Broadband, and my focus is the Digital Equity Act, which is a program that complements the BEAD program. So with BEAD, some states, not Minnesota, will have funding for digital equity activities, but because not all states will be able to access that, the Digital Equity Act levels that playing field a little and makes sure that every state gets funding for digital equity work. And this is referring to access to devices, access to affordable internet services, and access to skills or whatever training a person needs in order to have the skills to do the things they need to do with technology. There are 3 funding categories within the Digital Equity Act. There's 60 million in planning grants, 1.44 billion in capacity grants, and then 1.5 billion in competitive grants. The first round of competitive grants was just announced yesterday, and out of 700 applications, 24 awards were recommended, and 2 of them are from Minnesota. So we're really happy to see such good collaborations in the future. And I'll be talking, oh, I don't have control. Next slide, please. So for the capacity grant, this is a non-competitive formula grant. It's received by all states and territories. Tribes are also eligible to apply for a specific Native entity version. Minnesota's allocation is about $12 million, and our application for this was approved in December. So here's what's ahead with the Digital Equity Capacity Grant. In early 2025, we're preparing RFPs and grant contracts for NTIA to review and approve. In mid-2025, we'll begin accepting applications for some non-competitive grants that I'll elaborate on the next slide. And then by late 2025, we should be able to release a timeline for 2026 grant opportunities that will be open to all organizations that provide digital opportunity services. Next slide. So these are the future opportunities. The first one listed here is collaborative in nature. The following entities will be offered non-competitive awards, the amounts to be determined, to create and implement their own local or regional digital opportunity plans. We're aiming for mid-2025 on this, and the entities listed are cities, counties, tribes, area agencies on aging, community action agencies, veterans homes, regional public library systems, centers for independent living, and regional development commissions. These organizations were chosen because they align closely with the list of covered populations that NTIA provides. And we have to make sure that we are addressing the needs of these covered populations with this grant program. The second opportunity listed here is a networking opportunity. The Office of Broadband will pilot a digital opportunity leaders network that will combine local energy, regional expertise, and statewide continuity. We're hoping to do this around mid-2025 as well. So what this would look like would be a local organization participating with a regional partner who ties that region together to share information about digital opportunity activities, opportunities, etc. And then at the state level from Office of Broadband, there would be additional coordination to ensure that every bit of information we have about digital opportunity programs and services is reaching those local providers. And then last here is a competitive opportunity. The Office of Broadband intends to run a competitive grant program with the digital opportunity funding. The amount is to be determined, and this would be for organizations that are imagining and carrying out a digital equity project of any scale. We know that competitive grant opportunities can often be antithetical to the basis of equity. So we intend to take a close look at this and see what we can do to make the competitive grant process more equitable for smaller organizations that might not otherwise have a chance. And this is, we're aiming for 2026 on this. If you'd like more information about the Digital Equity Act program as we are carrying it out, I conveniently did an hour-long webinar just before this, and that will be posted on our website along with this BEAD one. So thank you, and we will go to whatever's next.
Yes, so thank you, Hannah and Diane. So at this point, here's just additional resources, but we want to open it up for questions. Knowing, as Diane stated, we will be doing a special webinar on the grants pre-qualification portal, so we'll have definitely much more detail there. But if you have questions, feel free to raise your hand, drop it in the chat, and we will start from there.